Hello and welcome to this Astranti video where we will be taking a look at the student survey responses from the August 2021 strategic case study exam sitting, and that was the second sitting for the Arfield Pre-Scene company. Okay, so what we did and what we always do after every exam sitting, we send out a student survey to all of our students or people who bought products from us. So some of them may not be full students. It's a wide range of people, but it's anyone who sat the SCS exam in August 2021. And the reason we do that is to get as much useful feedback as possible directly from students who sat the exam, so we know what went well for them, what they found difficult, and therefore we can turn this into useful feedback to you who may have already sat an exam yourself, and you may be curious about what other students think, or you're preparing to sit a case study exam, the strategic case study exam yourself soon, and you're trying to get some insight into how students find this exam. So in this video, we've got a range of stats and information for you that should give you some insightful feedback that will help you to prepare for your exam when you do come to sit it. So first of all, one of the first questions we ask relates to exam difficulty. We try to get an idea of how difficult students find the exam compared to their expectations. Now, bear in mind here that if a student expects the exam to be hard, and it is hard, then of course that's meeting their expectations. But generally, as you can see on the pie chart on the screen here, around about half of people found the exam about as difficult as they expected it to be. Actually, it's slightly less than half, which means that more than half find it easier or harder, which is interesting because we tell all of our students and we try to prepare them for how difficult it's going to be, but until you actually sit it, it's difficult to know. So this is what the actual students who sat the exam thought. And you can see there on the left that 29.8% found it more difficult. Okay, that's quite a big proportion of people, and 12.3% found it much more difficult. Okay, so more than 40% of people, if we take these two together, found the exam more difficult to varying degrees than they expected it to be. So this is a tough exam. Okay, and if possible, you want to go into it as a member of this group here, as difficult as you expect it to be. So you expect it to be difficult, but you've prepared for that and you're ready for it. So it's not a shock when you sit down and think, oh my word, this is very, very difficult. You don't want to be in this orange and red category here. Now, the ideal place to be, which very few people are, is this much easier and much easier. You can see fewer than 10% of people who took this exam found it easier than they expected. And in the rare case that happens, you know, that's a lucky position to be in, but more than likely you're going to find it as difficult as expected. Hopefully you will. Maybe you'll find it more difficult. The pass rate, incidentally, for this particular sitting for August 2021 was 69%, which is around about the normal pass rate for case study, the SCS exam, maybe even slightly higher. So it wasn't a particularly difficult exam compared to other sittings, because it was about average. So this is a pretty typical response for how difficult students find this exam. Okay, and when we asked this question, we also thought it might be useful to split between students, Astranti students and non-Astranti students. And as you can see on the left here, these were the Astranti students, and on the whole, Astranti students find the exam easier or as expected, 61%, compared to non-Astranti students who only about half of those found it easier or as expected. Now, we're not trying to say that, you know, we've got it all right, but on the whole, those who sat with Astranti, who were Astranti students, were, according to this data at least, slightly better prepared or had the right expectations for this particular exam. Okay, the next question we ask is what went well? What went well in the exam from the student's perspective? What didn't you struggle with perhaps as much as you thought, or you thought went quite well? And as you can see here, the two key things that stick out First of all, time management. So time management generally goes quite well. And the second thing is planning and structure. And what does that mean? Well, it means that even if you found the exam as expected or easier, or whether you found it more difficult, time management tends to go quite well. And the reason for that at this stage is you've probably sat at least one case study exam before, and you've certainly, if you've done the full level from the beginning, you'll have done OCS and MCS and all the OTs in between. So at this point, you're probably quite good at sitting case study exams. You know what to expect and you understand the time pressure. So for most students sitting this exam, time management is going to be something that goes well, whether you found the exam difficult or easy. You can write to time, you can move on to the questions, you can allocate your time appropriately. Planning and structure is another one. Now, as you can see here, overall, it was fairly high, but you can see it's significantly more blue, which means those who found it easier or as expected thought that the planning and structure went well. A much smaller proportion of those who found it difficult thought that this went well. And that takes us on to our second graph on the same thing. We can see a breakdown overall. So you see for planning and structure, 30% of students who found the exam as expected or easier thought that planning and structure went well. And that just goes to show how important planning is for structuring your response and for making the exam go by smoothly. Okay, because those who found the exam as expected or easier, there are almost twice as many of those who thought the planning and structure went well compared to those who found it more difficult. So there's no causation here, but there is correlation, and that correlation suggests that planning and structure, if you think that that goes well and you are well prepared for that and you do write a plan, then you're more likely to feel like the exam has gone well for you. Okay, the next question is what went poorly or what could have gone better for the students. And interestingly, it's the same sort of things that come up. Okay, again, students picking out time management, planning and structure, showing how important those are, what a main feature those two things are of this exam. So things that you really need to practice and get down before sitting the exam. But we've already talked about those to an extent. So what I would rather talk about is something a bit different. And that is this one at the top, question interpretation. And this figure means more when you look at this graph here, which is based on the same question, but you can see the difference between those who found the exam easier or as expected compared to those who found it more difficult. A much bigger proportion of those who found it difficult had a problem with question interpretation. It was probably the question interpretation, in fact, that they found difficult about this exam. So that's another thing that's really important to practice. Whenever you look at examiners' reports or listen to interviews with the examiners, you know that you will only get marks if you are answering the question that has been asked. You could write a beautiful essay that's completely sound and technically correct, but if it's not answering the question, then you won't really be awarded any marks for it. So question interpretation is a big deal. If you haven't understood what you're being asked to do, then you run the risk of providing an answer that isn't answering the question and losing out on all those marks. So practicing question interpretation through sitting mock exams, for example, is one of the most valuable things you can do in preparation for this exam. Another interesting one here is that we've got this big blue line for time management, and that comes from those who expect that the exam was as difficult as expected or easier. And the reason I think that this one is high is because the students here tend to do quite well on their planning and structure, the ones in blue, and they've got loads and loads that they want to say, but they're running out of time slightly towards the end, or they wish they had more time to develop all the points that they had in their plan. So those who found the exam as expected or easier, the reason why their time management is high is something that could have gone better is because they wish they just had a little bit more time to put everything down as they had it in their plan. Now, the chances are that those students, having done a good plan and structure in the first place, have probably got enough down to get good results anyway, but it's just that perfectionist in them that wants to do more. Okay, next up, we asked the students what they would have spent more time on in preparation for this exam. And you can see that actually across those first 4 areas, more time on theory, time management, answer planning, mock exams, all fairly high, but by far and away, mock exams at 45, close to 50% of students wish they'd spent more time on mock exams. And it is the single most valuable thing you can do as a student preparing for this exam. Set as many mocks as you can. Ideally, get them marked as well, because there's nothing quite like getting personalized feedback from a marker who can tell you exactly what you're doing well, but more importantly, what you're doing wrong and how you can improve on those things that you are doing wrong. Okay, so that's certainly in the top spot, but also not to be neglected is revising theory, time management, and planning answers. Okay, with this graph, again, we can see that where the red outpaces the blue, that shows that the ones that found the exam more difficult found this particular thing harder. So answer planning for those who found it more difficult was a bigger problem than for those who found it easier. Same goes with time management and theory. So these 3 things at the top, very important for getting ready for this exam, making sure that you can do all of those things. Interestingly, again, with mock exams and typing speed, you can see that the blue lines are higher. And that is very much like what we saw in the previous graph, where those students who had got the good plan, who had spent time studying the theory, that were well prepared, the exam was as difficult as they expected, they wish that they had done more mock exams to be prepared, and they also wish that they could type faster so they could get all of their thoughts down from their plan into their answer. Again, students in that level are generally going to be writing good scripts anyway. Okay, so if you come out of the SCS exam and your biggest concern is that you weren't typing fast enough, then you've probably done okay, because you're not worried about having revised theory or not understanding the question or having not developed a good enough plan. And the final question we asked was, what would you have spent less revision time on? And this is a interesting question, because as you can see on the screen, there are 2 things that stand out there. So what I will say about this is that let's first of all address this big line here, the industry analysis. Now, if you've ever read an examiner's report, and you should be reading the examiner's reports, you will see that the examiner specifically asks for and appreciates and will reward students who show a wider understanding of the industry in which the preceding company operates. So you do need to do a bit of further research into that industry. So with our field, it was the airport industry. If you'd gone into the exam without looking into that at all, you probably would have struggled, or it would have come across in your answers that you don't really know that much about the industry. However, you should not be spending a lot of time learning all the details and the history of the industry. You should just know enough about it to have a background understanding, to have some context, because the simulation of this exam is that you really do work for this company. So if you worked for an airport in the finance department, you would know about the airport industry. But it is just an exam, and this is just a kind of role-playing exam, so you don't really have to know the ins and outs. So don't spend too much time on the industry analysis. It's possible that this high figure here is because students spent a week or more going through the industry pack, learning about the industry, and that's too long. You really don't need to spend a whole week on that. A couple of days learning key stats and information about the industry, learning some of the industry paragraphs that you can learn and just use in your exam to show that wider industry understanding. So While it's possible that some students get a bit carried away researching the industry because it's interesting, don't neglect to learn about the industry as well, because that will be rewarded in the exam. The other thing as well is theory. And this is important at the strategic level because at this level, theory really isn't examined the same way that it was at operational or even management level. At this level, you're kind of moving beyond theory and you're giving good, rational, logical arguments and cases for decision making within the business world. So while theory and understanding of theory all goes towards helping you to make those decisions, actually knowing the technical details of lots of different bits of theory, that isn't really how this exam works. So if you, again, spent weeks and weeks revising all the intricate details of F3, that isn't necessarily the best use of your time, because really what you should be doing is moving beyond that technical understanding, using that as a background to make good business decisions within your role in the company. Okay, and another interesting point here right at the bottom is that those who found the exam more difficult than expected, a significant chunk of them would have spent less time on the pre-scene analysis. This is another pitfall. Okay, you can spend too long analyzing the pre-scene, going over it again and again and again, and then when it comes to the exam, you're presented with all these new unseen scenarios, and you thought you were going to be tested on the pre-scene. This isn't an exam where you're tested on the pre-scene. You're tested on your ability to solve problems as presented to you in the exam. You won't be able to resolve those problems if you don't know the pre-scene company well, but you're not being tested on your memory of every aspect of the pre-scene. So that's possibly what's going on here. So you certainly won't do well if you don't know the pre-scene company well, but you don't need to know, every page of the pre-scene off by heart. It's not that kind of knowledge that you need. Similarly with the industry analysis, you need to know the industry, but you won't be tested on, all the competitors on the industry. You need to integrate that knowledge into making good business decisions based on your role within the company. Okay, and that was it. That was all the useful information from that survey. So to quickly summarize what we learned from that data, first of all, don't expect this exam to be easy, even if you have sat OCS and MCS before. It's still a case study. Yes, you may be prepared for that, but you've not sat this case study exam. It is, again, another step up. Time management and planning are absolutely essential, as they always are with case study exams. So if you've struggled with that in the past, then do make sure you've practiced that. And you can practice that by sitting mock exams, okay? Sitting mock exams, timed exams that simulate the real thing. That's the best practice you can get. So do as many as you can fit in. And if you can, get them marked so you can get that personalized feedback from a marker who can tell you what you need to do to get better. Remember to use the industry pack wisely. Don't neglect it completely, but don't spend too much time on it. It simply isn't that important as a standalone thing. The same goes for theory. It's really important. You'll struggle to do well without knowing it, but really it's application and taking that theory to apply to new scenarios that you are being tested on. Okay, and with that, all that I want to do to finish off is just to let you know about our case study courses. So if you're an Astranti student, you're familiar with many of these. If you're not, just very quickly run through what we have. So the exam technique series, that is the series, it's a textbook and a set of videos we have that go through developing an exam technique. So how to plan your answers, how to understand the requirements, how to understand the marking scheme, all the things that help you to be prepared for this exam. The theory revision series is a selection of the key theory that comes up across the strategic syllabus that is condensed down a digestible format, and it's a recap of the key theory that might come up in the exam. The pre-scene analysis is a video series where we go through page by page looking at the pre-scene company, and the industry analysis is both a document and a video where we take a look at the industry and give you key takeaways for you to remember in preparation for your exam. And then, of course, we have mock exams. Each sitting, we have 5 mocks for you to sit, which are written specifically for that sitting. So they are unique to that particular pre-seen company. Marking and feedback is available on every single market exam. In addition to that, we have generic question packs. So if you want extra practice, we have a pack of 60 exam style case study questions. Aren't specific to the pre-seen, but are good practice for getting used to how to respond to exam style questions. Finally, we have 2 live masterclasses each sitting where you can attend. It's online, and our expert tutor will go through every element of the case study, right from exam technique and theory through to preparing for mocks and everything else in between. And on top of all that, we have a pass guarantee, which if you fill out the form, guarantees that if you don't pass the exam for any reason, you can use our course again for free for your next exam. So thanks very much for watching. I hope that video was useful to you. Best of luck in your exams. Hopefully I'll see you in another video.